Oh, very good. Thank you. It is good to be here. Thank you, Karen, for that. And I appreciate this gathering today as we're on day 2, I believe, live from all sorts of different places. And as we hit this 5th panel focused on children and youth, it is my pleasure to be here with all of you. And we are going to begin with opening remarks from each of our speakers that are here with us this day. So if I may, our kickoff speaker, first speaker for this gathering is Najat Maalla Majid, and a special representative of the Secretary General on Violence Against Children. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Richard. I would like to start by thanking the organizer and particularly Dr. Yael Bendel for inviting me to address the participants of the summit. The summit is very timely as the world is facing unprecedented global health, humanitarian, and socio-economic crisis. The pandemic and the related lockdown measures have caused a surge in domestic violence cases, women and children being main victims. Unfortunately, no place has been immune from this shadow pandemic, but even before the COVID-19 outbreak, home was not a safe place to live for so many children and women in the world. The Convention on the Rights of the Child acknowledges that family is a natural environment for the child's growth, harmonious development, and well-being. It can best protect children from violence and at the same time empower them to protect themselves. Despite this, for too many children, home is a dangerous place to live. According to the Global Status Report on Preventing Violence Against Children, jointly published by WHO, UNICEF, UNESCO, Global Partnership to End Violence Against Children, and my office in 2020, nearly 3 in 4 children, or 300 million children aged to 4 years, regularly suffer physical punishment and or psychological violence at the hands of parents and caregivers. Approximately 1 in 4 children aged under 5 years live with a mother who is a victim of intimate partner violence. The unprecedented global crisis due to the pandemic worsened already worrying situation for the most vulnerable children. What began as a health crisis risks evolving into a broader child rights crisis in the words of the United Nations Secretary General. Pandemic mitigation measures, including lockdowns, movement restriction, job loss, isolation, anxieties over health and finances, cause additional tension and stress on families. With school closures and disruption to already limited and under-resourced child protection services, children were left without important layer of protection. At the same time, the pandemic caused massive disruption to protection and justice system around the world and made challenging to detect, respond, and hold perpetrators of domestic violence accountable. Following initial decrease in calls during the first several weeks of lockdown, organizations and media from various parts of the world were reporting spikes in calls to child helpline. In UK, for example, since the introduction of national lockdown measures, the number of contacts from people concerned about children living in homes with domestic abuse rose by 49%. In Bangladesh, another example, it was reported that beatings by parents or guardians had increased by 42% and that there was a 40% increase of calls to the child helpline. In the same time, media and organizations are reporting sharp increase in calls to domestic violence hotlines across all regions. There is growing evidence that intimate partner violence and child maltreatment co-occur within the same households. Therefore, increase in calls to domestic violence helpline is another indication that violence against children at homes is on the rise. Yet, even these numbers don't give a full global picture and are likely to be an estimation of the magnitude of the problem as reporting and monitoring systems are weak and challenges exist in data collection and in many, many parts of the world. In addition, the mid and long-term socio-economic crisis caused by COVID-19 will increase child poverty and the associated risk factors for violence. In less than a year, the COVID-19 pandemic has had a devastating impact on the global economy, triggering the deepest global recessions in decades, including estimates of up to 150 million people being pushed into extreme poverty by 2021, affecting mainly women and children. And we know that this will increase the risk of children experiencing violence and exploitation, with the most vulnerable children being hit hardest. Dear friends, children who witness or are victims of domestic violence are at serious risk for long-term physical and mental health problems. Most common documented consequences of experiencing domestic violence include, but are not limited to, problems with anxiety, behavioral and emotional disorder, learning difficulties, depression, suicide attempts, addictions, low self-esteem, hostility, and emotional instability. Dear friends, in my work as special representative, I have been consistently drawing attention to the need to recognize the links between violence against women and violence against children, as they share not only the same causes, but also consequences across the lifespan and coexist within the same household. Violence against children and women within the family is deeply rooted in gender discrimination and low status of women and children in the society. Domestic violence is often fueled by gender stereotypes and social norms that normalize and accept violence, such as use of violent discipline against children. Moreover, domestic violence generates intergenerational impact within the family. Children who witness violence between parents may also be at greater risk of being violent or victims in their future relationship. For these reasons, preventing violence against children within the family is indispensable to long-term prevention of violence against women, intimate partner violence, and vice versa. Dear friends, the pandemic has shown us again that inequality, discrimination, and social disparities can have devastating consequences for children and women. We must use the development of building back better after the pandemic as an opportunity to reassess priorities, to advance human development, and reduce inequalities, especially for women and children. We must ensure that child protection is recognized as a life-saving and essential service, along with health, mental health, and education, as part of an intersectoral and child rights-based response to the pandemic response and recovery planning. This response should be built on a solid foundation of a permanent, inclusive social protection system, including universal child grants and universal health coverage that will protect children and their caregiver from economic risk. We must recognize that allocating budgets and strengthening services for the well-being and protection of children from all forms of violence is an investment in the future and will be key to the recovery phase as we build back. This cannot be done without children's perspectives and views and without involving them. Sorry, I have a problem. And without involving them, sorry, I have a problem with my This cannot be done without children's perspectives and views and without involving them as part of the solution in the immediate and recovery phase of this pandemic. My Monday joined the initiative #COVID-19, a global survey that generated over 32,000 responses from children from 130 countries on how COVID-19 affected their protection from violence, as well as other areas of children's rights. The top two areas of concern for the children were education and safety, which makes it imperative for the decision makers and government to ensure safety for children in all settings. In addition, child-led initiatives have increased as the pandemic has spread around the world. Worldwide, children are providing peer-to-peer support to help ease the stress they experience, sharing safety information amongst their peers, volunteering to provide essential services to other children in need, organizing themselves around positive messaging, documenting their lives under COVID-19, and sharing online their experience with one another. Dear friends, building back better cannot be just another mantra. It must have a real positive impact on people's lives, including children and women. As we take stock of responses to the pandemic so far and look ahead to building back better afterwards, we have the opportunity to reassess our priorities. We can choose to leave the inequalities and weakness in our social fabric as they were before the pandemic, or we can choose to build societies that are more equal, more just, and more inclusive. If we fail to take this opportunity, I fear we will not keep the promise of the 2030 agenda to end violence against children, leaving no one behind. As we commemorate the World Children's Day tomorrow and the 75th anniversary of UN this year, coordination, multi-stakeholder cooperation, solidarity, and multilateralism are needed now more than ever. It's an opportunity to seize for a strong mobilization of all key stakeholders, including children, at global, regional, and national levels to end the pandemic of violence against children. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam Special Representative, for those opening remarks. Definitely do appreciate that. I would like to now, as you have seen in some of the other programs and panels, we have some very special voices throughout the program. And so I'd like to share this voice with you, S, from the Institute for Transgenerational Studies, IET, and ADIVAC.
¿no? Te puedo decir jornadas de 10, 12 horas, muchísimo tiempo. Entonces, la mayor parte del tiempo la pasaban mis hijos, pues con mi mamá, mi esposo se podía despegar un poco más de su trabajo, y con las hijas de mi hermano, ¿no? De mi medio hermano. Empezaron a pasarlos, y para esto yo ya había empezado a ver algunos cambios en mi hija, la mediana, ella tiene 5 años. Cambios actitudinales como hasta la forma de sentarse, cómo caminaba. Empecé a notar cuando la bañaba, porque yo baño a mis 2 niñas, los genitales como más manipulados, ¿sabes? Como cierta irritación. Entonces, pues a mí eso no se me hizo normal, ¿no? Entonces le empecé a preguntar a mi niña, la empecé a notar en general sobreestimulada. Ciertas actitudes que no corresponden a su edad, como, ¿sabes? Como hasta el tipo de contestaciones parecía actitudes de un adolescente. Yo empecé a darme cuenta que se tocaba muchísimo sus partes íntimas, ella, ¿no? Cuando de repente yo la veía, cosas que antes no hacía. Empecé a notar varios cambios en ella. Me empezó a decir que no quería ir al baño ella sola, que quería que yo la acompañara, como miedos que ella no presentaba antes, o sea, cambios comportamentales. Después un día la veo, las veo jugando a las 2 y veo que la más grandecita agarra pues, a besos a la chiquita, pero besos en la boca, ¿no? Como si fueran de adulto. Esta situación volvió a pasar en 2 o 3 ocasiones más. Ella me dijo que mi medio hermano y su esposa jugaban, ella y con mi hija más pequeña, a los besos. Yo, ¿cómo que juegan a los besos? Sí, pues nos besamos en la boca, y dije, ¿pero cómo, entre ustedes o tú con tu tío y tu tía? Y me empezó a decir explícitamente que era con mi hermano y con esta señora, ¿no? Es una ruptura de confianza tan fuerte porque es tu familia. Y a pesar de que las estadísticas dicen que, pues sí, que las violaciones y que los abusos suceden más entre familia, creo que hasta que no te pasa, o cuando hasta que no lo vives de cerca, es cuando te das cuenta que es cierto, ¿no? Que esto puede suceder. Le dije que para nada su culpa, le dije, mi amor, esto, te agradezco muchísimo por habérmelo dicho. Dije, esto para nada es tu culpa, eso es una falta de respeto de tus tíos. Y tú para nada te debes de sentir culpable. Gracias por decírmelo. Y le dije, te lo juro que jamás va a volver a pasar algo así. Yo no lo voy a permitir, porque yo soy tu mamá y mi trabajo es, pues, cuidarte, ¿no?
And again, one of the important voices for our discussion today, so important for us to listen to. I would now like to introduce our second speaker, and that is Cornelius Williams. He is the Associate Director, Child Protection at UNICEF. Cornelius.
Thank you very much, actually. As Najat has said, the emergence of COVID-19 as a global pandemic has disrupted the lives of children around the world with impacts that may be long-lasting. Even before the outbreak, violence against children has been recognized as universal and widespread, affecting children in every country in the globe. Girls and boys experience violence across all stages of childhood, often at the hands of trusted individuals with whom they interact daily, as we've seen from this video, these voices. Sadly, most of the child victims never disclose their experience of violence to anyone or seek help. Now, more than 8 months into the pandemic, we have a greater understanding on how the health and economic crisis brought about by the virus is affecting children's exposure to violence. Whilst data is still scarce, recent findings point to increased risk for victimization, as well as changes in the demand for and delivery of services. Studies around the world are showing that stress is arising from disruption of livelihoods, family confinement, isolation can be triggers for violence and child maltreatment. Closing schools also carry risks. Teachers are generally alert to signs of abuse and neglect amongst children, and studies have indeed found that drops in reporting to child protection authorities by school personnel have tended to coincide with school closure. And despite the internet's extraordinary capabilities to facilitate remote learning and connections with the outside world, it can also make children vulnerable to myriads of dangers. Studies have shown increased exposure to abusive online content during periods of lockdown. This is tied with growing concerns about elevated risk of sexual exploitation of children amid increased risk of sharing online pornographic material. These widespread interruptions in the reporting and referral mechanism of child protection services have been observed across the world. UNICEF estimates that 1.8 billion children live in countries where violence prevention and response services have been disrupted due to COVID-19. What are these services we're talking about? Services typically delivered in person, such as case management, home visit for those at risk of abuse, have been most affected. We had that during the last session. Whereas child helplines have experienced the least disruption. An analysis of the data from 48 child helplines around the world revealed a dramatic increase in the number of contacts since the beginning of the pandemic. Since the start of the COVID-19 crisis, governments have struggled to meet unprecedented demands and in many cases have responded creatively and adapted service to meet critical child protection needs. At this point, I would like to highlight 5 key ways that services have been adopted. Firstly, maintaining social service workforce safety have been a concern, and increasingly remote case management is being used to overcome the challenge posed by social distancing requirement. In Malaysia, for example, social work practice is being adapted through greater use of phone and virtual contact to identify and assess children and families at risk, providing psychosocial support and assisting families to manage stress and mental health. Where the immediate safety of children is concerned, however, direct contact with children in their usual living environment remains imperative. Many governments are designating social workers as essential for child protection service delivery and providing them with the personal protective equipment necessary to continue the work. Second, we have seen how Child Helpline can ensure that children have a place to reach out when experiencing violence. These are important not only for referral of cases of abuse for services, but can also provide immediate support and counseling to children in distress. In Georgia, for example, a new Child Helpline has been overwhelmed by COVID-19 related calls. In response, a mechanism has been set up to screen and prioritize calls where children are at high risk, which is connected to a network of psychologists, social workers, and police officers. Third, we recognize the need to make positive parenting resources to help parents to address the anxiety and insecurity felt by their children following school closure and their own mental and emotional stress. In Jordan and Montenegro, for example, face-to-face parenting groups quickly pivoted to online platform, texting message, and telephone calls. We have also provided resources with our partners that have reached more than 80 million people through a variety of media and have been adopted by 29 governments. We now see a possibility for now scaling up parenting programs through remote delivery. Fourth, while celebrating how digital solutions have been deployed to sustain learning, play, and socialization, we have learned to remain vigilant in protecting children from online harm. Governments in Australia, Dominican Republic, Philippines, and elsewhere have used this opportunity to provide resources to parents in guiding their children safe internet usage, to work with schools to make sure that their virtual learning platforms are safe, and to engage with the technology companies to develop digital solutions for child online safety. The fifth and final point, there is now a greater recognition of the critical roles that school can play in child protection. We've seen the importance of maintaining children's access to teachers and school-based counseling service during lockdown. It is also important that schools have child-friendly procedures in place to identify and respond to and refer incidents of violence as school reopen. The provision of mental health support to returning children has often been made a priority. In the Philippines, for example, the Department of Education has boosted its child protection policy for online learning, adjusted its reporting mechanism to respond to the possible case of child abuse at home. To conclude, I will leave you with the words of our Executive Director. We are facing a child rights crisis. We need an immediate, medium, and long-term response that not only addresses the challenges created by the pandemic and its secondary impact on children, but also outlines a clear vision for a better world. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Cornelius. I appreciate your remarks. And we will now share another important voice. We'll move from S in Mexico now to Burundi. And this young boy, 15 years old, and his voice.
Niyonzima Salumu mfise imyaka 15 mbana na mama wanje umugabo wiwe n'abatoye banje batatu. Muri aya mezi indwi aheze nagiye ndahura n'ibibazo byinshi byo gutukwa no gukubitwa n'umugabo wa mama wanje. Kubera ikiza ca coronavirus yaratakaje akazi bigatuma yirirwa muhira kenshi ni naco gituma uguhohoterwa kwanje nabo tuvukana vyiyongereye cane gushika naho fata ingingo yo guhunga muhira. Iyo ngingo nayifashe kubera ivyo yankorera vyarambuza kwiga neza, kenshi narasiba no kw'ishure canke nkagenda mfise ibikomere. Naciye mpungira kwa muyomba wanje, ubu numva mfise amahoro. Mama wanje niwe gusa, mama niwe yarazi ibibazo nacamwo jewe n'abatoya banje, ariko nawe ntaco yashobora kuvuga kubera nawe nyene yaca akubitwa n'umugabo wiwe. Abagenzi banje barakunda kumbaza igituma nama mfise ibiguma nkababesha ko naguye. Hari n'ababanyi babibona ukuntu twafatwa nabi, ariko ntaco bigeze badufasha. N'ubu mama wanje n'abatoye yabanje babandanya bahohoterwa imisi yose yaka. Ni ngombwa rero ko abantu baca mu bibazo nk'ibi ko bagarukirwa bakaba bakeneye abantu babahumuriza bakabaremesha n'abandi bantu bobafasha kwitura ubutungane n'izindi nzego zibijejwe. Mwene ubwo bubasha bwotangwa n'abantu batandukanye harimwo ababanyi, abatware, amashirahamwe aharanira agateka k'abana n'abakenyezi, abamenyeshamakuru. Leta y'u Burundi irakwiye kugarukira ikibazo c'abana n'abagore bahohoterwa. Abantu bose bahohoterwa bategerezwa gushengezwa bagahanwa nk'uko bitegekanijwe n'amategeko dufise iwacu. Ivyo bizofasha mu kurandurana n'imizi ubwo bubisha.
These voices, we don't want to hear them, but they're so important to hear. And we can't thank all of the voices that we get to listen to today for their courage, because we get courage from them too. Yael Bendel, General Counsel, Office of the Protection of Children and Vulnerable Adults from the Judicial Branch of the City of Buenos Aires in Argentina. Yael, thank you so much.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I do apologize for the background noise. There is a public demonstration just at the front of my building. Don't worry, it's no against me. I will share the screen. Give me a second. Okay, here we are. Thank you, Mr. Louis, for moderating this panel. Many thanks to the organizers of this summit, and thank you everyone in the audience for your interest. I would like to refer to the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdowns. This is a global crisis, and children from all over the world are being affected. Look at this slide. The mandatory lockdowns accentuated, wait a second, here, accentuated and highlighted certain problems and challenges, such as the domestic and intrafamiliar conflicts, inequalities, educational problems, access to health care, violence, and the invisibilization of children from public life. I will refer now to the comprehensive child protection system. What is it? Which institutions and social actors are part of it? In the slide, you see the 5 main actors: educational institutions, healthcare institutions, clubs, cultural and sportive institutions, judiciary, child protection agencies, executive branch. Since the access to institution is restricted or disrupted, it becomes harder to detect signs of violence. So the problems are the restrictions and disruptions. Consequently, some situations have got worse. I would like to refer to some situations regarding violence we have observed. That 80% of the cases of violence against children and adolescents are perpetrated by family members, caregivers, or people from their immediate environment. Most of the cases of violence against children and adolescents are detected in medical appointments or at educational institutes. The severe lockdown in my country, Argentina, going on for around 8 months now, has deprived children from school and health care. 8 out of 10 children aged 8 to 14 that attended in our office, specialist interview office, say that they were able to recognize the situation of abuse through comprehensive sexual education. Incidents and reports of abuse have decreased dramatically, but not because there is a real diminution of cases of violence against children, but because of the disruption of the reporting and restricted access to authorities. With regards to grooming, COVID-19 60 was here, I lost the, here. No, here. With regard to grooming, COVID-19 social distance measures have increased the risk. Here you have some interesting numbers. Data derived from Buenos Germany Institute reflects that 62% of the parents allow their children to increase screen time during the lockdowns. Spending more time connected to social networks and online games can leave children vulnerable to risk of harm. Reports and complaints of grooming and child sexual abuse imagery is around 30% higher during the containment measures. Grooming is a crime that affects the psychophysical, sexual integrity, and the right to privacy amongst other children's rights. To close my presentation, I will refer to invisibilization. I enclose the word in quotation marks because there is no translation for it in English. In Spanish, this word is used in the social science to designate a series of cultural mechanisms that leads to omitting the presence of a certain social group, in this case, children. Why we say that invisibilization is a problem that has worsened? COVID-19 does not affect children in a particular way, but the restrictive measures adopted do affect them in a very unique and special way. Has anyone talked to the children? Did anyone ask for their opinion? Were they heard directly? What about their fears and their needs? Adults, Luis Bernera said that he's the chair of the Committee on the Rights of the Child. He said, adults must make the big effort in order to build healthy institutions for the children participation. States must provide scenarios where children could speak and be heard. I want to mention that today is the World Day of the Child Abuse. This is a day to notice this problem. This summit is a great way to do it. Thank you very much.
Yael, muchísimas gracias. And I can't thank you enough for offering your expertise to our conversation today, an important one when we focus on children. I'd now like to share another voice with you. That voice is of Christine Jack. She is the author of Recovering Boarding School Trauma Narratives from Australia.
My name is Christine Jack, and I'm one of a group of people who have experienced boarding school trauma. I'm also the author of Recovering Boarding School Trauma Narratives. When we were children, our parents sent us to live the majority of our lives in institutions without their love and support. We felt abandoned, experienced profound grief, and learnt to repress our vulnerable selves. For many of us, COVID has triggered us back into that childhood state. Here are some examples from my fellow boarding school survivors. For me, COVID brings the feeling of having all sense of control removed from me. I've become helpless and had to rely on government food packages, forcing me to eat what I was told as I had to at boarding school. I cannot leave the premises as I couldn't leave the school. This is the first time I've felt these things since leaving boarding school 40 years ago. COVID has brought back memories of losing my mum aged 6 and Dad deciding to send me to boarding school as though I was the problem. Out of sight, out of mind. I remember Dad saying goodbye to me at Waterloo Station and walking along the platform without looking back. I was confused and very hurt. My COVID issue relates to boarding school, which was over 50 years ago, in that I am still locked up. I have not been able to go out to see my grandson, who is hospitalised within walking distance. I've not seen one friend. It was like when I was locked up in a sanatorium in school in the isolation room for weeks. No one believed me. Living with COVID has brought back anxiety that began at boarding school, where I faced many nameless fears which stuck to me after that and are aroused in times of stress. Now I feel helplessness and a loss of control as COVID grinds its way into our hearts and the feeling of dread that accompanies it. I have felt dreadfully, as though I've been wrongfully imprisoned all over again. My parents told me they were going to come back soon for me, by which time I didn't even know them anymore. Lockdown suddenly resurrected this for me from 55 years ago. COVID has hugely triggered all my 5-year-old border exclusion and separation issues. Sometimes I can barely cope. These examples provide evidence that COVID, apart from generating emotional responses specifically related to it, has also awakened childhood trauma, bringing it to the fore and making the person even more vulnerable. It also reveals the lifelong effects of childhood trauma, which are triggered under stress in this time of COVID.
Christine, Jack, thank you for sharing your thoughts and the trauma that you've experienced, and with all of our voices, again, as I said earlier, for their openness and their vulnerability. And that's of course, we do not take that lightly at all, any of us on this discussion today on children and youth. I'd now like to move to Koumbou Baliberi, a special rapporteur on the right to education. Koumbou, the floor is yours. We have you now, Koumbou.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. I want to say congratulations to the team for this wonderful initiative because it's really how to see also our humanity. And for me, talking about violence, domestic violence is really the key message for our humanity today. As a special rapporteur, I want to share with you just really two main messages. The one message is the big picture when we are talking about the right to education. Just to say that today humanity is facing really we are really in a special context because before the pandemic, there is 1 billion of people who are not meeting the right to education. And in this 1 billion of people, the majority are women, girls, but also people with disabilities, people who are in the rural area, people who are refugees, migrants, and also nomadic people. And you know, this is the situation before the pandemic. When we are in this, the stakeholders, the government, many people also who are really education experts, they just forget those people. We are just talking about people who really were at school, and we forget those 1 billion of people. But it is also a context of the violation of the right to education, this context, because we have the first 1 billion of people, but now we have more than 1 billion and a half of peoples who are out of schools. And this is the worst situation where we are as an education system. And when we talk about the violation, it's first the violation of a right to education. And when we talk about also the violation of education in the education system, it is those causes who are coming from parents who are poor parents and who have to manage kids at home to be sure that they have food. And this is a big issue because the first time when the schools are open, the food is also at school. Now children haven't food anyway, they haven't this kind of opportunities. And for the parents, it's a hard situation to manage those kind of issues. And this is also the source of violence at home. But you know, the responsibility. I made a report also on education and the impact of COVID on the right to education. And we just seen the role of women during this context in the education system, because the schools are closed and education became remote education. It is using ICTs, and the responsibility of women became more and more, because they have to manage kids, to be sure that they have a space to learn, but also to be sure that they are able to help them to learn. And this is a new responsibility for women. And if they don't do this very well, it's become another issue in the family, because the husband, and in many situations, it's become your responsibility. You have to manage your kids. You have to manage your kid very well. And this is also is really a problem we have really seen. The other problem is that we have seen the people at risk. More than 24 people are at risk with the COVID-19 because schools are really closed. They come back. They said they can open schools, but the poor families and people, children who are nomadic people, or people who are living also with disabilities, they are not able to come back. And those girls, they take them for marriage in many countries in Asia and also in Africa. This happened. And we have seen early marriage became really the opportunity for those families, and those kind of people is also a violation of their right to education. And it is a violation for those young girls, because they are obliged to be married at this time and not to go at school. And this is an important violation of the right to people. The proposals I want really to make in this situation, for me, is the perspective of new vision of our society. If you want to build our society, a peaceful society, resilient society, but society where each citizen is able to live in peace, but also with autonomy, is to be sure that the right to education is a right for every person. That means also we have to rethink how to organize education in the long life learning process. That means intergenerational education. That means the oldest, but also the youngest, they have to be there. It is a holistic vision of education, from pre-primary to higher school, but also talking about the adult learning and also the older person to give them opportunity to learn. The second proposal I really want to make is also to continue to ask to each country, but also to in each area, that means municipalities and also at schools, to have look like a watch, an observatory in the classrooms, but also in the city, to be sure that the violations we can really manage and plan, see, and also assess those kind of violation at schools, but also to link them with the other area and the other wide. For me, the last proposal is really to be sure that we have a humanistic, but also a human right approach, to be sure that we are able to link the right to education, the right for the health, for the decent life, but also for sanitation, but also for, you see, for hygiene. And we know for some kids, and especially for girls, when they have the menstrual, we know it's really difficult for them to continue the process of learning. And this is also how to be sure that they have a good environment, to be sure that they are able to learn. I really want again to thank you for this important and pertinent opportunity you have given us, and really say again, congratulations for what you are doing. And I am sure if each country, each level, and each area is able to tackle the violations and the violence and domestic violence, I'm sure we are able to build a better world. Thank you again.
Koumbou, thank you so much for your remarks and for your reporting. We need light, right? And we get light through information and reporting, as you continue to do. I want to share another voice with all of you now, and that is Nicole Butterfield, an educator from the United States.
Hi, my name is Nicole Butterfield, and I'm an educator living in Westchester County, New York, just 4 miles from the New Rochelle containment zone established early in the COVID-19 outbreak. Our region is still recovering from the first deadly wave that killed many of our essential workers, including teachers, before we fully understood how to protect them. Last spring, as the virus spread, schools closed, leaving millions of children without educational, health, and nutritional support, as teachers scrambled to provide online classes with no time to prepare, often while caring for their own young children. Recognizing housing, income, and technology inequities, many school districts chose not to offer synchronous online classes, which left students to study in isolation at home, often with inadequate space and guidance. Parents, called upon to help their children learn, began to appreciate teachers as never before. Students lucky enough to attend Zoom classes benefited from their teachers' innovations and creativity, but also reported difficulties with internet connectivity, microphones, and cameras. Tech support responsibilities fell to parents and older siblings. This summer, a generation of parents who made Herculean efforts to raise their children with limited screen time desperately sought online courses in July and August as in-person summer programs shut down. Then they had to decide whether to risk infection by sending their children back to school in person this fall. As school districts announced reopening plans, pragmatic teachers updated their wills and advanced medical directives before returning to their classrooms. They also created flexible lesson plans, anticipating shifts from in-person to remote or hybrid learning. These shifts happened and keep happening. Stress levels are high, but every single day, educators put on their bravest, most upbeat faces for their students and keep moving forward. Resilient as they are, students are also experiencing unprecedented levels of stress as the pandemic continues to disrupt their lives. And forward-thinking, well-resourced schools are responding with efforts to support their mental health and emotional well-being. For the world's most vulnerable children, loss of time in school has severe consequences as countless opportunities to support their mental and physical health are lost. Although online learning serves many students well, it doesn't particularly help those who are displaced, very young, or disabled. And too many students simply lack access. So what can be done? Save Our Future is a newly established international coalition of over 600 organizations from over 70 countries that has put out a call for urgent investment in education to prevent a generational catastrophe. Their website, saveourfuture.org, is a great place to start if you're interested in taking action. There is hope if we work together on behalf of the world's children. Thank you.
And thank you so much for that remark and voice, Nicole. What a great conversation we've had so far. I do have another voice to share, but first, before we get to that, I do want to get to some questions for our esteemed speakers today. And in the limited time that we have, if you could keep your answers brief, that would be helpful. We have not a lot of time left on the other end of the clock, as we all can see. Cornelius, I wanted to ask you this. As the numbers are out there, and we all understand so well, and it's disproportionately hurt women and girls more, COVID-19 has. And I know that in my work in gender equity and equality with Plan International and its work for what was the Because I'm a Girl campaign over the years and across the continents, this has always been the dynamic, but this has especially hurt girls during this period of COVID-19. It's time for a role that we can't focus enough on, the role of men, the role of young men, the role of boys to stand up and be part of the solution here. Can you discuss that, please?
So definitely, actually, I mean, we have seen the role of men in terms of violence against women and girls, issues of masculinity, issues of bystander effect, okay, when whether men will take action. And we are aware of the patriarchal nature of society. So one of the things actually we have been pushing, and there are some excellent programs around that, like Sunka Justice in South Africa, how they're working with men to to play a bigger role in protection of women, to come out actually and to show that you don't need to normalize violence against women, to challenge the patriarchal and hierarchical society that gets women trapped. And it also includes actually looking at the law enforcement and training the law enforcement to be gender sensitive in the way they address violence. I think it was also mentioned. So there is a great role for men to play, but you can start with the boys, and that's why in schools, actually, we have to work with boys. It starts with their relationship and how they date as well, right? In schools, you can start with the boys, with boys club, and ensuring actually that there are gender sensitive materials to train these boys.
Yes, and I've seen some successful programs, of course, just as a reporter and as a volunteer, unlike all of our speakers who are actually practitioners in this space. And Najat, I want to go to you on a question. Please feel free to reflect on what was said by Cornelius, but one of our viewers also said this, and if you can react to that, it'd be great. We are talking primarily here about children and young people who live in families. Still, a lot of them live in orphanages or boarding schools. How has COVID-19 affected them?
Okay. I just want to add something to Cornelius, and I agree about what he was telling. I think it's important to take into account the role of faith-based organization. And we saw more and more, religious leader really regarding, fighting, with the gender stereotypes. And I think it's very important. Just to add something, I think what we are facing today regarding, power balance and also social norm and gender discrimination, I think it's important to switch, and this is what we are facing regarding preventing and ending violence. We have many piecemeal responses, but we have not really, continuing services. And I think this is what is important to mobilize and to work more regarding this synergy and complementary. Regarding children, your question regarding children in institutions, it depends on how country manage. We start collecting the responses. You have some countries who really take into account the protection of children placed in institutions because they are orphaned, because they are disabled, because they are deprived of family care. You have many. And they allow home visits, they allow contact. This was good. In some cases, some children who were placed in institutions were removed to their family, but this is not a good solution also because it was done without preparatory work, not taking into account the best interest of children. And you have in many countries, unfortunately, many children who stay in these centers without contact. And in some cases, you have the possibility of having call, but they feel more and more isolated and more anxious and really without links with their family. And I want to add another point is also the children who are detained, incarcerated. And I think also we have to take into account, and here you have also various examples. For example, in 17 countries, many children were released from detention. That is a good sign. But in many other places, they still be detained with few contacts with their family. But what we have also that due to social unrest, and you saw many protesters currently, you have also the arrest of children who are protesting or children who are not respecting, mitigation measures.
Thank you for those comments. I'd like to go to another question, a comment as well. This commenter says this: violent imagery drives social unrest and more so in the isolationist conditions of COVID. What should governments do to stop the production and dissemination of such imagery? And I go to you, Yael. It's on the lower left, Yael, if you can see the little microphone. Lower left, and you click that little mute button. Okay, I'll tell you what, I'll let you work on that. Koumbou, you're gonna come on by and you're gonna swoop in and help us as Yael fixes that the microphone situation. Koumbou, what do you think about violent imagery and what governments should do? And we're down to our last 90 seconds, by the way. So Koumbou, if you can share your thoughts.
Oui, merci beaucoup. Je pense que sorry, I began speaking in French. Sorry. I think what government can do is first to be sure that there is in international system some laws who is able to punish some kind of image. This is the first thing. But also in the country, they have their own laws, and it's very important to be sure that they have a minimum of control of communicating those kind of images, especially for kids. It's very, very, very important. To be seen the liberty of people is very important, but also how to use this kind of image, violent image who are really violent. It's very important to have a minimum of control, and also reglement, laws and regulation on that. But it's also important to communicate, because everything, it is communication, and it is also how at school and in education system and in the communication system, how are we able to help the kids and the people with new pedagogy to also refuse sometimes to see those kind of image. And this is also how the pedagogy and how the education system is able to help people to be resilient, also to have some behavior, and really to be autonomous when they have a choice, to make a choice, to see or not to see. And this decision to help kids to have those kind of behavior and attitude, also for people. But it's very important to use also communication media, but also to use the leaders in the community. And the first thing sometimes we really forget is the responsibility of parents, because helping kids is also one of the key responsibility of parents, to be sure what kind of message a parent is able to give to his children, to his child. And for me, this is key in families. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you so much, Koumbou. I appreciate all of our comments today and all of our speakers. And Yael, I know sometimes technology doesn't go our way, but I can tell from your earnestness in trying to fix it that you definitely believe in what we're here to talk about today. So Yael Bendel, for you, I will thank you for your attempts. I want to thank everybody for being here for this panel. We absolutely appreciate you being here for panel number 5, Children and Youth. Thank you so much, Najat. Thank you so much, Cornelius, Yael. Thank you, Koumbou, as well. And for our final voice, before we end the panel, I would like to share with you Tamir Ashman, domestic violence psychoeducation expert, co-director of Man Studies program from Tel-Aviv University. And with that, we say goodbye for this panel. Please enjoy this final voice.
COVID-19 entered our lives in March 2020. Since then, humanity itself seems to experience an unrelenting anxiety attack. The stress and uncertainty made family life and couplehood to a boiling pressure pot. Not many know that most domestic family violence is acted out by hurling objects, swearing, yelling, humiliating, silent raging, and physical violence. And it's not limited to men. In so many homes, children are exposed to a variety of violent behavior of the mother or the father, and sometimes both. A child that experiences his parents fighting in a violent way is traumatized. That in turn can easily transform to a post-traumatic legacy that will affect his or her whole life. To stop a multi-generational violence cycle, we have to focus our effort on the parental unit. To help change the child-home atmosphere, we need to equip the parents with effective tools and skills to communicate in an effective way, solve conflict in a respectable manner, and critically, how to fight right. Having worked for over 25 years with men who are addicted to rage and violence, I developed an 8-week-long psychoeducational program for efficient change of the violent cycle. We made 40 short videos that teach tools and skills of emotional regulation, and our team has been running an efficient and accessible online workshop for men and women who wish to change their violent way. Word about this virtual prevention center spread quickly on the social media, and since March 2020, more than 200 families started the journey of learning how to fight right. Parents participate in a weekly live Zoom session. They also meet at a sharing circle where twice a week they have a body orientation session that teach them how to listen and recognize the nuanced felt sense of the body, as well as body tools for healthy self-regulation of stress. There is a way to make COVID-19 a springboard for a new opportunity. There is a way to harness Zoom technology for the benefits of children and family who suffer from domestic family violence.
I'm a girl and not a bride.